Hello again everyone and welcome back to the Underground. This is the Ukrainian War Intelligence Update for Monday the 31st of January, and as always it is being recorded the day prior on the 30th of January. Before we get into the geopolitical update, I briefly wanted to touch on a challenge that ourselves and a lot of others are going to have to deal with, or are already dealing with now, with regards to finding out accurate information regarding what's going on in Ukraine. This will make the rest of the brief make sense, so I thought I'd mention it now. And this challenge is what we call circular reporting. Circular reporting is a mainstay of most journalistic agencies these days, but for the intelligence group or the OSINT analyst, it is the bane of our existence. So here's how circular reporting works. The first step is for someone to post something on a social media platform. In this case, we'll go with Twitter, right? Somebody posts a tweet about something, and then that tweet gets seen by a lot of people. So it gets seen by one person who then talks about the particular event, and then it gets seen by a third person. And that third person now says, hey, we've got multiple sources confirming this information is true. Like, we like to throw that word confirming out a lot, which I don't think a lot of people know what confirming actually means. Confirming does not mean you read two tweets on the same topic. It means that you went through an actual process to verify that the information is true. But nevertheless, we have a lot of people going around saying that, this is confirmed, this is confirmed. Well, what does that even mean? But in any case, you have a third entity, a group, usually a journalistic agency, which now sees this entire conversation taking place on social media, and now they're starting to spin things out of control, right? And now they see, we've got multiple sources confirming that World War III is about to break out, right? When in actuality, really you can circle all of this back to the original tweet, which isn't verified. It's not anything special. It's just somebody saying something. So this is a huge problem. It's not just a problem for the OSINT world, this is really a problem for the human world as well. You know, person A tells person B a story, who tells person C a story, and then person A, B, and C show up at your shop wanting to get paid for human intelligence, and they're all sharing the same exact story. So you can't really say that's three sources, right? Because they all heard it from the same person. We see this all the time in the intel world, both on the professional side and on the OSINT side of things. It's just a huge problem that not very many people are interested in addressing, because circular reporting is a great way, it is a fantastic way of coming to the conclusions that you want. You can cherry pick information, you can say that you've got multiple sources when really it's just going back to the same guy, so you can get whatever narrative that you want to push by using circular reporting. So please keep this in mind when you're taking in information regarding this Ukrainian situation. Even we here have become bogged down with circular reporting over the past week or so, and the fighting hasn't even really kicked off in earnest yet, if it ever will. So with that out of the way, let's jump into the geopolitical update. First up is Norway and Finland. So both of these nations, as well as the rest of Europe, honestly, but mostly Norway and Finland, have been undertaking a lot of civil defense actions with regards to any potential actions with Russia. A lot of nations around Europe are dusting off their old civil defense manuals and starting to either refund or take civil defense seriously again since the Cold War, and Norway and Finland have been undertaking a lot of steps to do so over the past few days. For Norway specifically, we're seeing circular reporting or rumors stating that the official government has sent out letters to 4,000 residents of Norway informing them that their vehicles have been identified by the military as a potential wartime asset, so if Norway goes to war with Russia, their army is going to come confiscate their vehicle. Now again, I should stress that's just rumor at this point. We haven't seen a copy of this letter if it exists, and if you do any searching for it online, the reporting is very circular, and you can't really find anything about this. It's not on any of the official press releases of the Norwegian Civil Defense Force or the Army, so I don't know. So until we get a copy of the letter, we're just going to have to treat this as rumor, but it does make sense. Likewise, similarly in Finland, the Finnish military has been observed to be emplacing lots of air defense artillery, surface-to-air missile sites, and things like that around key political locations, key cities, critical infrastructure, things like that. So basically dusting off a lot of their old Cold War civil defense plans. This makes sense considering Russia's actions in the region, but we also have to remember that this could also just be another posturing attempt. Both Norway and Finland, and really every other nation in Europe, knows that Russia sees what they do. So if Finland is observed to be putting up SAMs around their capital and Norway is sending letters to their citizens, this is a message to Russia that, they're getting ready, right? So it might be more of a psyop than it is a legitimate civil defense concern. However, with the amount of Russian posturing in the region, it does make sense for a lot of legitimate civil defense plans to be reignited and people start taking civil defense seriously again. Speaking of preparations being made, Germany has also announced that they are going to evacuate non-essential personnel from their embassy in Kiev as well. This actually occurred a while ago, almost immediately after the United States declared that we're going to bring our people out of our embassy, the non-essential personnel and stuff like that. So the reason that I want to talk about these embassies is because this is actually a very big deal. You might not think that closing an embassy is kind of a big deal, but it really is. Closing an embassy, like fully and totally closing it, is essentially in the international arena telling the world that there is no diplomatic solution left. So that's a big deal. And even though the United States has not totally closed our embassy, and Germany hasn't either, even the action of getting non-essential personnel out of the area is signaling to the world, signaling to Ukraine, signaling to Russia and the rest of Europe that the United States has no hope for fixing this diplomatically, and we're trying to get our people out. The rats are jumping off the ship, right, because we know it's going down, essentially. Embassy actions are a really great way to kind of figure out what governments are going to do. Clearly, the United States thinks Ukraine is a lost cause. Same thing with Germany, and I guess we'll have to see how many other European nations feel the same way. Moving to Russia, an interesting note that has come out recently regarding Russian preparations for this invasion surround the stockpiling of blood in forward areas. Limited reporting has come out recently indicating that Russian forces have begun to stockpile fresh whole blood and other medical supplies in frontline areas. Historically, when we're talking about the doctrine of warfare, this is a last-minute logistical preparation that takes place right before a major conflict. This is not unique to Russia. This is just, hey, if they're stockpiling blood, this means that this is serious and it's pretty much imminent, right? As such, the forward staging of blood and other medical supplies is a very strong indicator of an impending conflict. So this is just another check in the column of Russia being serious about invading Ukraine this time. However, this report is coming from the U.S. government, right? So take that with a huge grain of salt. Literally no one on the planet has more motivation to lie about intelligence regarding Ukraine than senior U.S. military officials who are personally, heavily financially invested in the military-industrial complex. So any reporting coming from the U.S. and coming only from the U.S. that cannot be verified by any other means, right, is kind of suspect. This might be a lie from the United States to make the situation look more dire in order to profit financially even more. I mean, just look at what Lockheed Martin's stock has done over the past 3 months. So war is very big business for some people, but for us down here, it just adds another layer of complexity. Adds another reason to why it's difficult to find accurate information that we can use to make decisions. And speaking of U.S. troop movements, the United States has recently announced that they will be sending several thousand troops to the European theater. We don't really know where they're going to go yet. Most likely a lot will go to Poland. Hungary has already stated that they will take 3,000, so we'll see how this all works out. But what does this mean? A lot of people are seeing troop deployments, and they're going into full freak-out mode because they don't want U.S. troops to be involved in a conflict with Russia, which is a valid argument. Mostly, this is what would be considered a proportional response according to the Cold War playbook. Russia gets a bit aggressive, and the U.S. sends a few thousand troops to Poland. It's a tale as old as Khrushchev. It literally goes back that far. Russia expects us to do this. This is what they're planning for, and the rest of NATO expects us to do this as well. What is not going to happen is troops being sent to Ukraine itself. That's not going to happen in any significant numbers. Remember, the U.S. has had a training mission in Ukraine for years now, so there are small numbers of advisors in Ukraine already, but it's not in any significant number. And, of course, the beardy dudes with nice pants have been in Ukraine doing stuff for years now, but by and large, we're not going to see massive deployments of conventional troops within Ukraine. That would be a massive escalation of force, one that the United States and NATO is not prepared to back up with any other forces. And we also have to consider that the United States rhetoric has been that we're not going to defend Ukraine. So as scary as it is to start sending thousands of troops over to Europe, this is not particularly out of the ordinary. Now, if we start seeing the rhetoric being changed to include the defense of Ukraine, Now we'll have to change our assessment on that, because if we start sending conventional U.S. troops to defend Ukraine, well, the shooting match might be over before we even get a brief around to talk about it, honestly. So I guess we'll have to see how that works out. Also within Russia, we're seeing media outlets pushing the narrative that panic buying is occurring in Kiev. I wanted to point this out because it's kind of spinning out of control in Russian media, and this is blatantly not true. Life in Kiev is what I would consider to be disturbingly normal. There's really not a whole lot going on in Kiev. Of course, a lot of people are trying to leave right now, the people who are trying to get out, like foreigners and Americans and things like that, but it's really not in any kind of panic mode. There aren't any shortages of any things that we can find on the grocery store shelves, like Russian media is stating. There's really not much going on in Kiev with regards to the civilian populace, being panicked and whatnot. But we can talk a little bit about the attitude in Ukraine a little bit later, because that's a whole other can of worms. Also within Ukraine, I did want to mention that there was an insider attack at the Southern Machine Building Factory in Dnipro. A Ukrainian conscript who hasn't been named yet killed 4 of his fellow service members a few days ago. No more details other than that, though, with the world on pins and needles looking for the telltale Russian false flag attack, incidents like this draw a lot of attention. Likewise, over the past few days, there have been protests in Kiev regarding a new tax law that requires vendors to use cash registers so that they can be more easily taxed. This is an interesting little domestic issue, right? But again, with the world on the lookout for Russian assets destabilizing Ukraine's government, any kind of anti-Ukraine or anti-Ukrainian government protest or riot at this point is highly suspicious, no matter what it's about, right? Then again, who knows? Just because there are, 100,000, 150,000, 200,000 Russian soldiers on, the Ukrainian border, doesn't mean that domestic issues magically go away. But considering that this kind of thing is right out of Russia's playbook for destabilizing a government, we have to watch events like this closely. Moving on to the naval update for the Mediterranean Sea, the task force of 6 Russian ships has made it into the Med. They passed through the Straits of Gibraltar a couple of days ago, so they are on their way to the Black Sea. We don't know exactly where these ships are at in the Med because they're out of AIS range, but once they start getting closer to the Black Sea and they start going through the Turkish Straits, then we'll know exactly where they're at. So we'll keep you updated on that. Moving up north a little bit to the GIUK Gap and the North Sea. For those of you who don't know what the GIUK Gap is, it is the body of water, the geographic area. It's kind of a nomenclature for the body of water in the North Atlantic between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom. Very common nomenclature when talking about Russian submarines and the routes they take when trying to transit down to the American East Coast or conduct operations in the North Atlantic. And speaking of Russian naval operations, the Russian government has declared that they will be conducting a live fire exercise in the areas depicted on the slide off the coast of Ireland right there. The Russian naval ships, surface vessels, we don't know which ones yet, will be participating in a rocket firing exercise in the square box, and the circular box there is the landing area for where the rockets are supposed to land. So the big question is, why would Russia do this in this particular area? Well, the obvious answer is political pressure, right? Russia wants to make the United Kingdom well aware of the fact that they are an island nation and the Russian Navy is quite powerful. But I think there's another reason. This area is not new. This is the same area that last year a Russian Tu-142 was observed to be circling and flying around, presumably communicating with a submarine. So Russia has done a lot of activity in this particular area. They did a lot last year, and they're again signaling that they're going to do some more. And if we overlay this next chart, I think you'll understand why. This is the map of all of the undersea communications cables in the area. And as you can see, the training area, right, for their rocket exercise, right, in heavy air quotes, is directly over a series of cables that runs from the United Kingdom to New Jersey. So, I wonder what Russia is going to be doing in their exercise, right? It's almost like Russia is going to be conducting this exercise to have an excuse to have surface ships in the area for submarine activity down below. Of course, this is speculation. Russia has not declared that submarines are going to be taking part in this exercise, but we can pretty well guess that that's what's going to happen. And this kind of makes sense, honestly, because Russia has, for those of you who don't know, Russia has a very long history of losing submarines. They have lost more submarines at sea than any other nation, And as such, usually when Russia is doing some kind of risky behavior, like going down to the seafloor or something like that, when they have a submarine operating in an area, they usually have a surface-based rescue vessel nearby. So if we start to see Russian submarine rescue vessels, the vessels that we know do this, we'll know that there are submarines in the area. But honestly, you can just look at the map here and pretty much guess this is what Russia is going to be doing. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking. Is this a way for Russia to start cutting cables between the United Kingdom and the United States? I personally don't think so. Yes, there are very strong indicators that the last cable that we talked about, the cable between Norway and Svalbard, that cable was cut. Actually, there was a piece of it taken out, and it's almost certainly Russia, right? But I don't think that they're going to be cutting cables this time. I think they're probably going to be mapping or training or something like that. Or even better, this is yet another political move to let the United States and the United Kingdom know, hey, we have this technology now, and wouldn't it be a shame if we cut your cables? Kind of a way of politically pressuring the U.S. and the United Kingdom again. So again, I don't think Russia is going to be cutting cables this time. If they were, they wouldn't be declaring a training exercise. They'd just be sneaking out and doing it, right? Or planting explosives on multiple cables to sever them all at once, right? So by declaring a training exercise in this specific area, this is almost certainly a political message more than it is an actual military exercise, right? But I thought it was interesting, this kind of thing when it comes to Russian submarines and cables. This gets the attention of a lot of very high-ranking people in the military and in the political structures around the world. So you can rest assured that even though this sounds like kind of a small issue, this is a very big deal, and a lot of very powerful people are getting a lot of briefings on this. I would be willing to bet. So for those of you who want to learn more and get the grids for this actual training area, there are a few grids going around on the internet, but I'm not quite so sure how accurate they are. I haven't pulled the actual grids from the Russian government, but here is the NOTAM for it. Again, highlighting how important NOTAMs are, we can actually get the corner grids for both the firing area and the operational box for the Russian surface vessels. So this might be subject to change. This box might be larger or smaller. This is just for aviation assets to let aviation assets know that they're not going to be able to fly in this area due to the rocket launching. So when we get better grids for where this operational box will occur, we'll update you then. I also want to mention that there's a little bit of a diplomatic issue between Ireland and Russia over this. Irish fishermen and other fishing groups have stated that they will be protesting this military exercise. The fishermen have agreed to abide by a safety standoff of a few miles, but we will, in all likelihood, be seeing fishing vessels shadowing whatever Russian assets make their way down for this exercise. And as we can see, this exercise takes place, at least the NOTAMs are in place for the 3rd and the 4th of February. So, again, once we get more accurate information about this, and once we actually do confirm that these NOTAMs are for the naval exercise, this might be a totally different exercise, because this is a common firing area, I should mention. We'll provide that update when we get more information. Before we move on to the actual fronts, I wanted to talk a little bit about some climatology data and the weather. Again, we're seeing a lot of information being talked about in the mainstream media, and so we just wanted to offer a little bit of clarification with regards to the data itself. So, this is a chart showing the average temperature in Kiev during the month of January last year, and this is February of 2021 as well. As we can see, the temperature kind of fluctuated a lot, but it did get a lot warmer towards the end of February, but it also remained cold up until the midpoint in February. So that's last year. Now, if we look at the chart for this year, this is the month of January 2022, we can see that really on average, the month of January has been quite warm, or at least warmer than it has been in the past. So that's why people are saying that Ukraine's winter has been unseasonably warm this year. Ukraine actually hit a few records with regards to temperatures, high temperatures over last year, so that kind of makes sense. Now we can kind of project what February is going to be like based on the averages. So this is a chart showing the average temperatures by month from 1985 until 2015. So not super helpful, but it just kind of gives you the gist of what the deal is. So what I wanted to talk about is, does this even matter that much? Yes, weather is one of the most important factors for planning military operations and is usually a critical factor for the success or the failure of a military objective. We've talked a lot about weather over the past couple years on our channel and how important it is for military operations, and that is true, it is. It is a very big factor when considering military operations planning and things like that. But it's not the only factor. And in the specific case of Russia invading Ukraine before the spring thaw sets in, I'm not sure if frozen ground will be enough of a deciding factor for whether or not to begin this military campaign. A lot of mainstream sources, a lot of think tanks and OSINT sources are holding on, they're grasping onto the ground temperature as if it's the only factor for whether or not Russia's going to invade. And I don't know if it is. I don't know that, and no one up to and including the Joint Chiefs know that. And honestly, I don't think that even most Russian military leaders know what the final decision factors will be either. It's all guesswork based on history and what we know about Russian military doctrine. But things can change. And even most Russian soldiers are probably asking themselves, is this for real this time? So when it comes to weather, it's all a gamble. Russia might decide to wait and see if conditions get colder in the early part of February and allow much of what is now muddy terrain to become frozen. But that's a gamble, because if February turns out to be mild, just like January was, they will be even more disadvantaged than they are right now. Then again, all of this can change in a single day with the arrival of a freak cold front that brings temperatures down for a couple of days. Usually it takes a couple of weeks of cold temperatures for the ground to freeze within an acceptable level, but who knows, Russia might jump at the opportunity if the conditions are right. In any case, we do know this. Climate conditions, even right now, are less than ideal for a ground invasion with armored elements. And conditions might or might not get any better than they are right now. The grand question that will remain unanswered for the time being is what conditions Russia will deem to be acceptable, and whether or not those criteria will need to align with other factors that are also important for the invasion. Moving to our overall theater slide, the theme for all of the fronts today is going to be there are a lot of updates, but not a lot of updates that we can put on the slide. So we're seeing a lot of reinforcements reinforcing pretty much every unit that we have seen so far, but not a whole lot of them that we can actually verify with any level of acceptability. So let's go ahead and jump into the actual fronts themselves. On the Northeastern Front, really the biggest activity we have seen is up in Bryansk, as one might expect. Pretty much every unit in the area being reinforced with supplies, logistics. We're seeing a lot of logistical vehicles and supplies being moved into the area. We're also seeing forces in Belarus being reinforced quite heavily, but we'll talk more about that when we get to that front. Moving to the Eastern Front, there have been reports of conflict breaking out in the outskirts of Mariupol as well as Donetsk. This is nothing major. It's not a major offensive or anything. This is most likely just harassing attacks that have been pretty standard in these areas over the past few years. Conflict on the outskirts of Mariupol as well as within the entirety of Donetsk has really been a mainstay over the past few years. So even though you're seeing a lot of combat breaking out along these fronts, it's not necessarily a prelude to an invasion just yet. We're watching it closely, though, so if we start seeing harassing fires beginning or stuff that's out of the ordinary with regards to what combat has normally been in this area, we'll let you know. But for now, it seems to be status quo on the Eastern Front. Moving down south, really the biggest update has been the reinforcements coming across the Crimean Bridge, which links Russia with the Crimean Peninsula. There has been a lot of significant activity observed along this bridge over the past few days. Units have been streaming across this bridge into Crimea 24/7 for the past couple of weeks. So the reinforcement and staging activity within Crimea continues as we move forward. Moving to the Northwestern Front, like I mentioned, pretty much every unit that we're seeing being staged in Belarus is getting reinforcements. The town of Yeltsk has been host to a lot of these reinforcements, as well as really the whole Gomel region. We're also seeing forces being staged at various military bases, Belarusian military bases around the area, such as this one in the town of Rechista. This is a normal Belarusian military base, highlighted in yellow there towards the bottom of the slide. But we're also seeing a lot of videos come out because the town there, as you can see, envelops the main rail yard there. So we're seeing a lot of civilians post videos of armored vehicles offloading and being staged there in Rechista. So we and a lot of others will definitely be keeping an eye on a lot of Belarusian military bases to monitor the buildup over the next few days. I also wanted to briefly touch on evacuation options. So this is something that a lot of people are starting to think about. I know we've touched on it very briefly in the past, but I wanted to dive a little bit deeper now that the U.S. government has essentially stated that U.S. citizens are on your own for getting out of Ukraine if and when this stuff kicks off. So air travel. For the most part, when and if this full-scale conflict begins, all air travel will be unreliable at best. We are expecting most major airports within Ukraine to become inoperable within the opening stages of the invasion. Again, this all depends on what Russia does, but I personally would not plan on aerial evacuation being a viable option. It's still a viable option right now. It's status quo. There are flights leaving Kiev all the time. But when this stuff starts, you've got to start thinking about other things, right? Remember, civilian airliners have a history of being shot down in this theater by Russian assets, so egressing by land, by vehicle, or by rail is a much more stable and reliable option. However, that also presents challenges. In the worst-case event of a full-scale invasion occurring, I would expect trains to be either targeted by Russian aviation assets or be confiscated by the Ukrainian military to move troops to the front lines. Similarly with roads, expect dozens of miles of traffic jams on every single road leading out of the country. Roads to the west in the more rough terrain might also be of lesser quality as well. Traffic through mountain passes is precarious in normal times and even more dangerous when there is a flood of people hurrying to escape the country. And unfortunately, another major consideration is jab status. Quite simply, you might not be able to escape Ukraine if you are not jabbed, depending on what country you're trying to go to. I know this sounds outlandish, but here is an email from the U.S. State Department that has been circulating on social media talking about this exact topic. We've had to censor certain words so that YouTube doesn't delete our entire channel, but this email covers the regulations for entry into the nations that border Ukraine. As we can clearly see, evacuating is not as simple as one might think. Again, for those that think that these regulations will change in the event of a war breaking out, that's fine if you want to think that, but that's a gamble. And we have to remember that a precedent has been set with regards to evacuations and jab status. Remember when cruise lines refused to rescue islanders from St. Vincent when a freaking volcano erupted? People literally had to choose between living on an erupting volcano and getting the jab to escape. So there is already a very strong precedent for governments, private companies, and other agencies to deny life-saving evacuations or medical treatment based solely on your jab status. So keep that in mind when considering evacuation plans. As always, with massive events like this, which draw the world's attention, there is a time in which the waters become muddy with regards to information, like we've mentioned. Personal politics get involved, and this makes it very difficult to find accurate information. We have a lot of powerful players saying a lot of things about the Ukraine situation, and this heavily influences the risk management actions of individual people. To explain this, let's take a look at the political situation in Ukraine. A bit of political strife has emerged between the political leadership in Ukraine and the political leadership here in the United States. Ukraine's leadership has publicly taken the position that this overwhelming buildup of Russian troops along their border is not as big of a deal as the United States is making it out to be, whereas the United States and other NATO members are in panic mode. Now, trying to cut through all of the political posturing and other BS surrounding the Ukrainian conflict, here's what I think. The cultural difference is everything. Ukraine's leadership is both weary of the past 8 years of war and at the same time completely understanding of the situation regarding a potential full-scale invasion. Ukraine has been living with an invasion for a long time now, so even though we Americans might look at Ukraine's statements of everything's just fine and think, wow, they're crazy, the threat of an invasion just doesn't carry the weight that it does with Americans. You will constantly hear stories all over social media about how Ukrainians in Kiev are just going about their daily lives and acting like nothing is wrong. And in many cases, these reports are true. I myself would agree that this is a bit perplexing to me as well, but that's me, a Westerner who is not living in that situation. Now, all of this being said, I do want to caveat that by pointing out that there is a significant civil defense effort underway in Ukraine. There are a lot of Ukrainians arming themselves and preparing defenses. So I don't want to make it out to look like the Ukrainian people are completely naive as to this invasion potential. There are efforts being undertaken. The larger point that all of this illustrates is the political turmoil that is currently present among the political leadership of all parties involved. The Ukrainians are accusing the U.S. of overhyping the threat, and accusing the political leadership of not understanding that this conflict has been going on for some time. Meanwhile, back here at home, you've got military leadership salivating at the prospect of sending someone else's kids to get killed in a war so that their Raytheon stocks will go up. And on the other hand, you've got people who don't support the military-industrial complex and don't want to fight a war that isn't our own, but also recognize that Russia is a powerful entity, and one of the very few entities that can affect your life here at home. So it's probably not a good idea for them to freaking invade Europe. Meanwhile, we've got pundits and political groups using their politics as their metric for what their opinions are, rather than the situation on the ground. All of this political stuff is frustrating, and there are a lot of strong opinions out there about Ukraine already. But unfortunately, this is a big factor in determining how this Ukraine situation will affect our lives here at home. So thank you for sticking around as we try to provide information and intelligence on this incident, especially as it applies to the 20,000 plus Americans that are still in Ukraine, as well as the people here at home. As we all know, international incidents like this have a way of coming to our doorstep extremely quickly. So even though most people don't care about this stuff, we will keep on the lookout for information and lessons that we can learn so as to avoid a repeat of history here at home. So thanks again for watching, thank you for your support, and we will see you next time. And as always, fight in the shade.